Welcome to part 4 of the NPC tutorials. So let's get that dialogue up on screen that we've put over in our data table. To begin with, we're going to head over to NPC base and we're going to finally fulfill our progress dialogue script. Let's start by just getting the text on the screen to make sure it's absolutely working. Drag out dialogue actual, holding down control so we can get a getter. And then we're going to drag out of that array and get. We'll get a reference. We'll come back to this variable here. Let's drag out of our dialog widget. And then out of dialog widget, let's type in set dialog right there. If we plug the output of that array getter into dialog, then plug in the executable to the executable, that's going to get us something on screen. Next up, where we actually call the progress dialog script is going to be important. So if we come up here, we have our progress dialog at false. So if we press the interact, then we progress the dialog if we are in a conversation, but we need to fire off progress dialog once first after we refresh dialog. So the best place to put that is down here in this script. So we don't want to put it at the end because then we have to wait 2 seconds for that dialog to pop up, remembering we have a delay here and a delay here for our camera fades. What we want to do is seamlessly put that up in between the camera fade so we don't see it on screen. So let's make some room between the last camera fade, drag out of add to viewport and type in progress dialog. So as the camera fades, then everything pops up on screen nice and smoothly, and then we will begin the conversation. One other thing we need to do before we get started, conversation index. Let's set the default value. This will be 0 to begin with, but let's set that default value to 1 because we don't have a conversation 0. If we have a conversation 0, then this isn't functioning properly. So set conversation index to 1 so we have somewhere to start. Let's compile and save that. Over to the test map. Let's hit play. Let's walk up to our NPC. And if we press E, we'll get the interact print string on the top left, and then the camera fades will happen, and prerequisites not met is always our first conversation, so that's what he's going to say. So that's brilliant. We've got our dialogue system working, at least to begin with. The next thing we need to do is account for leaving the conversation, because right now if I walk away, the conversation is going to stay up there. So we need to have a start conversation and an end conversation script to handle putting up that dialogue and removing it. I say start conversation, but we've already done that. We've actually done that here. So what I've decided to do between that episode and this is another custom event, start conversation. Also, I noticed that I misspelt conversation here, so I'm going to change that. So just to clean this up a little bit, we'll plug this start conversation event there. Holding Alt, I'll get rid of the completed connection and drag that back there. And then out of completed, I will drag out of that and start conversation. Just a little bit cleaner than having that executable jump down. So now hopefully that's easier for someone to read too if they're not familiar with this script and they can understand what's going on. Again, you want to build so that other people could potentially understand it, especially if you're planning on working in a team. So that's our start conversation script done. Next up, let's work on an end conversation. So we'll type in custom event again and call this end conversation. So progress dialog is what's going to detect whether we've ended a conversation or not, because progress dialog is in charge of, as it says, progressing the dialogue, which script-wise is just advancing through this array. So we'll fill this out and then end conversation will appear. Now this array here, this index, this needs an identifier. So we're going to add another variable. It's going to be called line_index. We'll drag it up here so it's with the other two, and that's also going to be an integer. So progress dialog event is also going to be in charge of progressing the line index. So before we even get into the dialog, we should check to see if there's even any lines in that dialog. So let's check dialog actual and get length, which is just going to get how many things are in there. We want to make sure this is greater than our line index. So basically, if our line index is above how many items are actually in the conversation, then we're done. We don't need to say anything else because there's nothing more to say. So we'll first check that. And then once that's done, we can plug that branch into true. And then I want to introduce you to another node. Let's drag out line index. We're going to drag out of that, type in 2 plus signs. So this here is an increment integer. You might remember that we've done script in the past where we've got a getter, we have a plus sign, and then we reset that. This is another version of that. So it adds 1 to the specified value and sets it, which is fine when we're dealing with these gradual inclines. So it wouldn't work elsewhere. But when we're going up by 1, we just want to add 1 to the counter as if we were just counting anything else. Then this works perfectly. So every time we are done with this dialog, we're going to add that 1, which means that if dialog has 3 entries, entry 1 will fire through. So line index will be equal to dialog actual being 1, and then it'll fire through again. And then at some point, the line index will exceed the amount of dialog we have, which is how this works here. So when the line index exceeds the dialog, that's when we're going to get down to end conversation, like so. And this is getting a bit messy, so I'll have to just do some rearranging. So end conversation is going to be the opposite of this script. We're going to still do the camera fade, and it's up to you if you wanted to still disable inputs, but I'm going to copy that over anyway, just in case you want to. We don't need to add a widget to the viewport anymore. In fact, we need to do quite the opposite. We need to grab our dialog widget and remove from parent to get that off screen. And then we'll do our camera fade back in again. So if you're doing camera fade from scratch and you're not copying that down, just remember that alpha 0 to 1 for a duration of however long you want equal to the delay there. Hold when finished, and the opposite here, alpha 1 to 0 once we fade back in. And one final thing we'll need to do at the end of our conversation is grab our array. In fact, we'll do this in the middle. With dialog actual, let's drag out of that array and type in clear, because when we come back for a second conversation, we don't want the dialog from the first conversation getting in the way. So we'll put clear there. Let's go and give that a test run. Compile and save. So I'll hit play. I'll walk up to our NPC, standing in front of him in the interaction box, pressing E. We fade the camera out. He tells us our prerequisites are not met because that's the conversation we've just had. And if I press E again, the camera fades out, the UI disappears. One more quality of life thing we'll add here is we will go up to the top, to the parent begin play, get a little more room here. Let's get player character, cast to B_hero. You've seen it before. We've done this 100 times. And I have a leftover reference hero from when I was showing you why we have to do a separate child actor for interaction script, but you know how to deal with this. Right click, promote to variable, call it reference hero. I'm just going to use the one I still have here. Compile and save that. And now with that reference, let's come down to the spot here for progress dialog. Drag the hero reference out. Drag out of that. Get reference HUD. And set visibility. We want to set it to hidden when we're in a conversation, because it looks a little messy on screen when we have our entire HUD there. So again, we'll move this over here. And if we've hidden the HUD, then we also need to bring the HUD back on screen when we're done with the conversation. So I'm going to drag this over again, paste that down here. So after clearing the dialog, between fading the camera, we will set the HUD back to visible. So that should make it a little easier to read on screen. Compile and save that. And now when we have a conversation, our HUD disappears as designed. And when we exit the conversation, our HUD comes back. So we're going to leave it there for now with our dialogue up on screen. In the next episode, we'll get our name on screen as well, reading from our data table. We will also do a few more quality of life improvements, and we'll do a little bit of temporary script to get our conversations moving, because in future, our conversation index will actually move according to whether you've completed a mission or not. But because we haven't set up the mission system, we will do a workaround for now. And then once the missions are set up, then the dialogue system will make more sense. So I will see you guys in the next episode.